Hello everyone and welcome back to our flipped classroom. Today we're going to talk about methodologies for different text types, specifically methodologies for comparing and contrasting. Comparing and contrasting can be defined as noting the similarities and differences between two or more things, in this case, two or more texts. The two methodologies we'll focus on today are emphasis and verisimilitude.
Emphasis is defined as 1. Special importance, value, or prominence given to something, or 2. Stress laid on a word or words to indicate special meaning or particular importance. Emphasis can be used to compare and contrast texts through the use of properties such as punctuation, arrangement, color use, the author's voice, etc., and how these properties may be similar or different between texts. Here's an example of how emphasis can be used to compare and contrast two texts. The text on the left is a tweet and the text on the right is a cartoon. The text on the left, or the tweet, addresses the purpose of Planned Parenthood, such as people going there for STD and HIV tests, pregnancy tests, birth control, condoms, health screenings, and mainly abortions. And it also addresses who is able to go there, and which is men and women. So the text emphasizes that Planned Parenthood isn't just for women, nor is it just for abortions. It does this through the use of its punctuation in the writing of the word men. This addition of the exclamation point stresses and challenges the idea that women aren't the only ones who are able to go to Planned Parenthood. The text also adds emphasis to what Planned Parenthood is for, which is abortions, and it challenges the idea that it's not just for abortions through the use of its punctuation by adding periods after not, just, and the word itself, abortions. Emphasis can also be seen through the listing of what Planned Parenthood gives to both men and women. And this arrangement draws attention to the reader because it's convenient for the reader to read and it's straight to the point. Now, the cartoon addresses what people go to Planned Parenthood for, such as STD tests and for abortions as well. But these reasons are why people are unprepared for Planned Parenthood. The emphasis that can be seen in this cartoon is the emphasis on the word unplanned, through the color contrast between the and the planned. And because of the color contrast, it shows that Planned Parenthood helps people who are actually unplanned for parenthood. There's also emphasis on these reasons that people go to Planned Parenthood, such as through the color choice from the creatures, which draws attention to the fact that people go to Planned Parenthood for STD and HIV tests. There's also emphasis on the solidity of the words unwanted pregnancies within the open door. And this adds emphasis to this idea of abortions because it draws attention to the fact that people go to Planned Parenthood mainly for abortions, which juxtaposes the purpose of Planned Parenthood and what people go there for. Additionally, there's emphasis on the creatures or monsters at all, because intuition tells us that monsters are something to fear or avoid, and this shows audience that Unplanned Parenthood releases these monsters, which represent STDs, which demonstrates that this is what people should be afraid of. Now, the way these texts compare is because what's being emphasized in both texts addresses what people go to Planned Parenthood for, such as STD tests, pregnancy tests, health screenings, but mainly abortions. And also, the idea of abortions, which is mostly emphasized in both texts, juxtapose the name of Planned Parenthood itself and the reasons why people go there, which is essentially because they are unprepared for parenthood. However, these texts contrast because of the properties they use to add emphasis to each text. For example, the tweet uses punctuation and arrangement, while the cartoon uses color choice and universal ideas.
Verisimilitude. We can define this as the quality of a text that would cause the reader to believe it is true or has a semblance in reality. We can use this to compare and contrast texts by looking at the different ways in which that text grounds itself in the world that we live in, and thus we can take the ideas presented in that text more seriously. That does not mean all texts have to be fiction for verisimilitude to apply. Certain ideas presented in non-fiction texts or in descriptive texts could have verisimilitude, as they use more descriptive characteristics to ground themselves in a world that is more relatable to the audience they hope to reach out to, and therefore we, as a reader, would believe it. Two texts we can compare and contrast as an example of using verisimilitude as a methodology are a Yelp review on our left and an excerpt from Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale on our right. The Yelp review reads, "I would give this place 0 stars if I could. A monkey doing puppet silhouettes could run this place better than its current status." And the Handmaid's Tale excerpt reads, "Arousal and orgasm are no longer thought necessary. They would be a symptom of frivolity merely, like jazz garters or beauty spots. Superfluous distractions for the light-minded. Outdated. It seems odd that women once spent such time and energy reading about such things, thinking about them, worrying about them, writing about them. They are so obviously recreational." The first thing that's similar between these two texts in regards to their verisimilitude is that they are both critiques of sort. With the Handmaid's Tale excerpt being a critique of the past, while the Yelp review is a critique of a specific restaurant. The fact that they are both critiques adds to their verisimilitude, as a critique is inherently an opinion, and in this case these are informed opinions, as both authors here have experience with the topic they've chosen to critique. Adds a critique, this already adds verisimilitude, as now this implies that someone has been there, someone has been to this restaurant, Alfred has been to this past, she has experienced this past, and we as a reader can understand that this does exist somewhere, giving it a semblance of reality, and perhaps it still exists now. Another component of the two texts that are similar relating to verisimilitude is the use of metaphor or simile, in this case with the Yelp review saying, "A monkey doing puppet silhouettes could run this place better than its current status," and Alfred of Handmaid's Tale saying, "Like jazz garters or beauty spots, superfluous distractions for the light-minded." This adds a sense of verisimilitude to both texts, as it shows that both of them are aware of the realities of which we, the reader, come from, and that gives we, the reader, something to relate to. And now that we have something to relate to, we can better ground this story, or in the case of the review, this experience into our mind as something that is real and capable of happening to us, giving it a more realistic feeling. A contrasting component of how the two texts add to their verisimilitude is the use of the author. In the case of The Handmaid's Tale, with Alfred being the character speaking this excerpt, she says, "It seems odd that women once spent such time and energy reading about such things, thinking about them, worrying about them, writing about them. They are so obviously recreational." This is Margaret Atwood speaking to the text, and with the character and the author both being women, this claim has another more realistic sense, as obviously a woman will have a more realistic perspective on what it is women do to fill recreation. This adds verisimilitude, as the author and the speaker are offering an exclusive perspective that only women, and in this case Alfred, could realistically portray. This adds a sense of ethos to the writing. And through that ethos, we come to trust the text more, and we come to ground the text more in a realistic setting. And we then add it to our own reality, as we too, as male and females of different mindsets and different perspectives, have certain ideas. And therefore, we can come to see that this text is much more relatable in that sense. Where the Yelp review contrasts The Handmaid's Tale is in its use of both humor and imagery, and once again describing a monkey doing puppet silhouettes running the restaurant better than the actual staff. This is clearly an exaggeration, as this would not be true in a real setting. However, even though this is an unrealistic event, it still does add to a semblance of realism, and also towards the idea of verisimilitude, as we understand that we would not want to go to a restaurant run by a monkey doing puppet silhouettes, so why would we want to go to a restaurant in which the staff is liking to something like this? Once again, making the text relatable in this sense, and especially because people go to a review for a beginning opinion, this is very quick and to the point and offers the reader, who is perhaps looking to get an opinion of this restaurant, an idea of what they can realistically expect from the staff while there. The Handmaid's Tale lacks in this respect, as it does not include any extreme humor or exaggeration like the Yelp review. However, the Yelp review in itself lacks the unique perspective that the Handmaid's Tale excerpt offers, contrasting the two, even though they've both managed to strengthen their realism and their verisimilitude through their own means. However, one could still realistically consider the Handmaid's Tale expert to have the most verisimilitude and the most sense of realism, as what it includes is a much more descriptive and detailed version of a past that we know all too well and can very easily relate with, more so than an exaggeration of which is very vague. This concludes our flipped classroom video on 2 methodologies from which we can compare and contrast different texts, those being emphasis and verisimilitude. Thanks for watching.